Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Y'all hear me? Okay, alhamdulillah. Brother Joshua, thank you for letting me know you can hear me, alhamdulillah. So we'll go ahead and start. I know it's already 13 after the hour. We're starting a little late. I apologize. And it's Ramadan, so I'm going to plan to stop right at 4, inshallah ta'ala. So we'll go ahead and begin. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق الخاتم لما سبق ناصر وقل هدي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره العظيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وأزواجه أمهات المؤمنين وذرياته وأهل البيت كما صليت على إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم إني أسألك من كل خير سألك منه محمد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وأعوذ بك من كل شر استعاذك منه محمد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم اللهم اغفر لنا ما قدمنا وما أخرنا وما أسررنا وما أعلنا وما أنت أعلم ما منا ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من فتنة المحيا والممات ومن فتنة القبر ومن فتنة المسيح الدجال ومن عذاب النار وسوء المصير اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد رضي الله عن أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العظيم يا أحمد الشيخ اذكرني يا بني المحتر وتأتي في بدرة تأتي من أبلغ أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Welcome everyone to our weekly Maliki Fiqh class. My name is Brother Habibur-Rasul Miller, Ustadh Habibur-Rasul Miller, and we are continuing our lessons in Maliki Fiqh, going through lessons taken from rulings taken from the text Shar as-Saghir, um, and of course, as you all know, this is a text that this information was taken from my teacher Sheikh Amin Abdul Awal, who studied these rulings with Dr. Suleiman Dunya, rahmatullahi, a big Asari scholar in the madhab, and alhamdulillah, we were able to sit with Sheikh Amin for a number of years and learn this information and get the permission to teach. In addition to drawing from these rulings, and as you all know, we didn't study the matan, but we studied the rulings on these subjects. And in addition to this, we also studied, many of the well-known introductory texts of the madhab, like Akhdari and Ashmawiya and Muqaddimat al-Aziyya and Ibn Ashar, Mushra al-Mu'in, and parts of the Risala. And so this is what we're drawing on for this information. I like to start, as you all know, many of my classes with a hadith, and alhamdulillah, thank you. I like to start many of my classes with a hadith, and the hadith I'm going to share for today is a hadith that comes from the Sunan of At-Tirmidhi, a famous, well-known scholar of hadith from his well-known collection. And this hadith is reported by Juray al-Nahdi. He reported that the Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam said, Subhanallah, or glorification of Allah, is half the scale. Then Alhamdulillah, or praise of Allah, fills it. And the exaltation of Allah, right, the takbir, Allahu Akbar, fills what is between the heavens and the earth. Then he says, fasting is half of patience, and purification is half of faith. Fasting is half of patience, and purification is half of faith. And the reason why I wanted to begin with this hadith is because it connects fasting, of course, with patience, right? And for that reason, this month of Ramadan that we're in is sometimes referred to as Shahr Sabr, the month of patience. And when we're fasting during the month of Ramadan, right, for those of us who are able to fast from food and drink, it requires patience, right? It requires you to be patient and to not get, angry, frustrated, tired, with the fasting. that could lead us to, that would make the fasting from food and drink harder, and could lead us to speech or actions that could detract from the efficacy and the benefit and the reward of our fast, right? And whether you're fasting from food or drink, or you're not able to for health reasons, or whatever reason why a person might be exempt from fasting, you still have to have patience to engage in a fast of the eyes and the tongue and the heart, right? To be in the spirit of the fast, right? To be abstentious, to abstain from speech that is not pleasing to Allah, from behaviors that would be inconsistent with what we should be practicing all year round, but especially in the month of Ramadan. So we have to have patience. And then we spend the night in prayer. And when we spend the night in prayer, making tarawih, making these long prayers, right? Or much longer than most of us are used to making throughout the year, right? It requires patience. You're standing for a long time. You might get an itch, you might get a cramp, you might get an ache, or you might get a pain, or you might just get antsy from standing, in prayer so long. It requires patience, So this month is a month of patience, and we want to maximize on our benefit from this Ramadan with regard to the reward we get, which requires patience, and we also want to maximize with regard to our use of the Ramadan as a sort of training ground for how we're going to live and what we're going to do, how we're going to be after the Ramadan. So this is a month of patience. And so we start with that hadith because it's appropriate, because we're in the month of Ramadan. Now, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to jump back into the lessons from where we left off. And we left off on the section of nafila. I was mispronouncing it in a previous class, but nafila. Our discussion of nawafil, extra prayers, non-obligatory prayers that we choose to do. And I'm not going to spend too much time recapping because I think the previous class is uploaded on YouTube, but I'll just quickly run through some of what we've already discussed. We started with the section of when it is haram to engage in nafil prayers. When we say nafil prayers in this case, we mean specifically salah. If you read some Quran, if you engage in extra fasting beyond what is obligatory for us, if you engage in reciting some adhkar, some dhikr, you say subhanallah wa bihamdi, subhanallah, these things, all of this counts as nawafil. But in the context of the discussion we're having here, we're talking about nafil salah, right? Prayers beyond the fard prayers that we are obligated to do. And so we mentioned sometimes that it is we mentioned sometimes that there are times when it is haram to offer nafil. I'm just looking at the previous lesson to see what I want to sort of, restate and what I think we don't have to return to. But so what are the times when it is haram, when it is not permissible to engage in nafil salah, right? The first time that we have here, we mentioned, was when the sun is rising, right? And the second was when the sun is setting, because the Prophet ﷺ specifically told us not to pray at those times. He said the sun rises and sets between the horns of shaitan. The third we mentioned is that it is haram to start a nafil prayer when the imam is giving the khutbah for Jum'ah, right? We know that we see often people standing up to make nafil salah while the imam is giving the khutbah. According to our understanding in the Maliki madhab, this is not permissible. If you see someone doing it, they may be following a different way. They may be following a different understanding. And we discussed the hadith in the previous class that people use to as a basis that people give people the impression that you should make your nafil salah, your two sunnah to greet the masjid, even when the imam is making the salah. But our understanding is that hadith does not indicate that this is a practice that we should engage in regularly. That in actuality, the stronger opinion, the better practice is to avoid making nafil prayer while the imam is giving the khutbah and to sit and listen to the khutbah. The fourth time we said it's haram to start nafil or to do nafil when the imam stands up to go to the pulpit. Why? Because when he stands up to go to the minbar, the pulpit, to give the khutbah, he's getting ready to give the khutbah. So don't start your nafil. You should have came before to do a nafil if you wanted to do a nafil before the khutbah. But once he starts, you don't begin. But if you've already started, you quickly finish it. The fifth we mentioned is if the optional time of dhuhr is going to finish, and there's only enough time for 4 rak'ah before the obligatory time of dhuhr begins, and you have not prayed dhuhr, it is haram for you to make nafil. So in other words, if praying the nafil is going to cause you to pray the fard prayer outside of its proper time, right? Outside of its proper time, outside of its ideal time. If it's going to cause you to stretch into the obligatory time, then you should pray the fard rather than praying the nafil. The sixth thing we mentioned is that if you remember that you did not do a previous fard, whose time has passed, then you shouldn't do nafil. You should go do that previous fard first and then come back to make a nafil prayer if you'd like. And then the seventh we mentioned is that when the muadhin starts to call the iqama for prayer, it is haram to start to engage yourself in nafil. If the imam calls the adhan for dhuhr, or the first adhan for jum'ah, or the adhan for isha, the adhan for asr, and you want to make a nafil prayer, you can. But once he starts the iqama, you should not. Maghrib is a little different. Again, there are some who have the opinion that, you can make nafil or even should make nafil after the imam calls the adhan for Maghrib. But my understanding, I think most of the madhahib agree, but I haven't studied the other madhahib, so I could be wrong. But certainly the Maliki madhab, in our madhab, we are of the opinion that you should not make nafil at that time. Maghrib, the time is short, and so the time between the adhan and the iqama should be short. But in any case, I want you all to be aware that there are people who have other understandings. So if you see someone doing something different, right, it doesn't become a source of fitna, right? If you'd like, you can engage them and educate them about what you have learned to be the proper way, right? But if they have a basis for what they're doing and they've learned from somewhere else, then we don't have to have fitna. We can disagree, we can have ikhtilaf without it being a source of fitna. But for my advice to you all is to follow this way. So when the imam calls the iqama, when the imam calls the adhan, you can make nafil, with the exception of maghrib. But once he calls the iqama, it is haram for you to begin a nafil. You don't put the extra nafil prayer above the obligatory prayer, nor do you put making an extra nafil prayer above making the obligatory prayer in jama'ah. So when you get the chance to make the prayer in jama'ah, you should take advantage of that and make it in jama'ah. Now, we're going to move on to the makruhat of nafil prayer. When is it makruh to offer nafil salah? It is makruh, first point, bismillah, it is makruh to make nafil after the 2 rak'ah of fajr prayer until about fajr prayer until about 15 minutes after sunrise. During the time of sunrise, nafil is haram. Even though fajr is a nafil, its time begins at dawn. So here when we say the term fajr, we're not talking about the fard prayer that we make at the time of fajr. So oftentimes we talk about the first prayer that we make before sunrise as fajr, right? It's fine. There's nothing wrong with using that term, right? But in many of the Maliki books, we refer to the fard prayer as subh. Those of you who've been coming to the classes regularly, you know this, right? So when they say fajr in many of the Maliki books, they mean raghibat fajr. They mean 2 rak'ah of nafil salah, sunnah salah, that are made before you make the fard prayer. So the Prophet ﷺ said that to make 2 rak'ah, 2 rak'ah of salah before the fard prayer of subh, before the fard prayer of fajr, he said it is worth more to him than all the sun rises upon, right? This is one of the hadith that support this practice. So this is a regular practice of the Prophet ﷺ that is good to engage in if you have time. If you get up to make the fard prayer of subh and you have enough time before you get into the obligatory time of subh, it's good to make 2 rak'ah. And the Prophet ﷺ used to make them very quick, right? And what we learn from our teachers is that we only make Fatiha, right? We just make the Fatiha. We don't add an additional surah or additional verses from the Quran after the Fatiha. And we make these 2 rak'ah very quick because you want to make sure that it doesn't interfere with you making the subh in its proper time, right? And because this was what the Prophet ﷺ did, he made them quickly. So they mean fajr. When they say fajr, they're talking about those 2 sunnah rak'ah, right? This nafil. And they say you don't make any nafil salah after you make those 2 until about 15 minutes after sunrise. Why? Well, you're going to make your 2 rakat of Salatul Subh, right? And you don't make any nafil between Raghiba to Fajr and the Fard Salat of Salatul Subh, or you could say the Fard Salat of Fajr. You don't make anything between them, and you don't make any nafil salah after you've made the Fard of Salatul Subh, of Salatul Fajr. That time you stop. And then when the sun is rising, you don't make nafil. And then you give the sun some time to make sure that it's fully arisen. This is the safest way. And then about 15 minutes after the sun rises, some say 15, some say 12, something like this. But we can say 15 to be safe. Then you can begin to make nafil salah again. This is the time for what they call salatul ishraq or salatul duha, right? The nafil prayer that you can make after the sun rises, or the nafil prayer that you can make in the bright morning hours, sometime before noon, before Dhuhr comes in, right? So you don't make any nafil salah between that. You make the 2 rak'ah of Raghiba, you make the two fard rakat of Salatul Subh or Salatul Fajr, and then no more nafil salah until after the sun rises. And they say it's makruh, so it's actually not haram in the time between when you make the 2 nafil and the time when sun rises, but at the time of sunrise, the nafil is haram. At the time of sunrise, the nafil is haram. So I hope I'm not confusing you. I hope you're clear on that. To make a nafil salah while the sun is rising is haram. To make a nafil salah after you make the 2 rakat of Raghiba to Fajr and before you make Salatul Subh, or any time after Salatul Subh before the time of sunrise, that is makruh, right? But to make nafil during the time of sunrise is haram. And if anybody needs any clarifications, please go ahead and type it in the chat, inshallah. I'm looking at the YouTube page, and it seems that chat is disconnected at the time. So I'm not sure why. So if you're on YouTube and you're not able to type a question, or if you type a question and I don't respond, it means I didn't see it. So jot it down, and inshallah, hopefully next week, or maybe later on in today's class when the chat is working, you can ask, inshallah. The second makruh, in terms of makruh times of making nafil, it is makruh to pray nafil between Asr and Maghrib, right? You should see a pattern here. It is makruh, and sunrise is makruh, but at the time of sunrise is haram. Between Asr and Maghrib, makruh, but at the time of sunset, it's haram. So it is makruh to pray the nafil between Asr and Maghrib. There are 2 parts on this point. One, it is makruh between Asr and before the sun starts to set, and it is haram during the sun's setting. Then they go to talk a little bit more and elaborate on this point a bit. They say if someone, for example, becomes accustomed to praying a particular amount of rak'ah, say 10 rak'ah, before Fajr, they are allowed to do these rak'ah after Fajr if they oversleep, meaning after the sunnah time of Fajr. You are allowed to do this because you are accustomed to doing these rak'ah every night. This is also called collect prayers. Collect prayer means like a weird or a hizb. But on this particular night, you overslept. However, the collect prayer has some conditions. So here they're going to say, even though it is generally makruh to make salah, nafil salah, during this time of Fajr, aside from those 2 Raghiba to Fajr, there are some exceptions to that. So they're going to give us some exceptions. The exception is, first of all, for the person who has a habit of making some extra rak'ah. Some people, they make 10 rak'ah a night, or Qiyam al-Layl, or Salatul Tahajjud. They don't just do it during Ramadan. We make Taraweeh, they do it all the time. So what happens if you oversleep? Well, you're now an exceptional case because you're in this habit, so you have a little bit of latitude, but there are conditions on that latitude. So they're going to tell us these conditions. Bismillah. First, it should be done before Isfar. This means the yellowness in the sky. If you remain sleeping until isfar, you are not allowed to make these extra prayers. However, in the case of fajr, you are allowed to make them until the sun begins to rise. At the time of sunrise, you are prevented from saying fajr. But after sunrise, you are allowed to say fajr until dhuhr. After dhuhr, you lose the chance to say fajr. And again, when they say fajr here, they're talking about raghibat al-fajr, the nafil. So let's break this down. They're saying, let's say you oversleep and you wake up and Salatul Subh has been in for 20 minutes, for 30 minutes, something like this, right? You can make the nafil prayers that you normally make before Subh, right? As long as it doesn't take you into the obligatory time of Salatul Subh. What is the obligatory time for Salatul Subh? When there's enough natural light in the sky that if you had no street lights or anything like that, you can look down the street and see that's a brother walking down the street. That's a sister walking down the street. That sister has on a burgundy hijab. That brother has on a green thobe or something like this, right? So you start to see some light in the sky, right? Once you start to see some light, that amount of light in the sky, you should no longer make any nafil prayers. Now you're in the obligatory time for Salatul Subh, and you should pray Salatul Subh straight away to make sure that you make it in its proper time. So, but if you wake up, like let's say you are in the habit of making shaf and witr, right? The last 3 rakah that we should be in the habit of making. It's a sunnah. It's not a fard, but the scholars say it's like the strongest sunnah, the sunnah that the Prophet was very consistent in doing. The Hanafis even give it a different name. I think they call it wajib, like to say it's virtually mandatory. But it's a very strong sunnah. So let's say you're in the habit of doing that every night, but one night you oversleep. You fall asleep before you make it. Now you wake up and Salatul Subh just came in. Well, you can make it. You can make your 3 rakah, shaf and witr, and then make your raghibatul fajr, and then make your Salatul Subh. And if you can do that and without pushing your Salatul Subh beyond the beginning of the obligatory time, then you're fine. But once you get to the obligatory time, then you have to cut those things and make Salatul Subh. Then you stop making any nafilah until about 10 or 15 minutes after the sun rises. Then you have a chance again. So let's say you wake up during the obligatory time of Salatul Subh, and you say, oh, I got 20 minutes before Subh goes out, before Fajr goes out, right? And it's already enough light in the sky that I think I'm in the obligatory time. What do? You make Salatul Subh, you make the fard of Salatul Subh, then you don't make any more rakah until about 10 or 15 minutes after the sun, well, we'll say 15 minutes to be safe, after the sun has risen. Then you're in the habit of making tahajjud, right? You can make those rakats at that time, right? And you have the right to do that up until you reach the time of dhuhr. And when you get to the time of dhuhr, then you stop. Then no longer are you making Salatul Raghiba or Shaf and Witr. Now you're just making some different nafilah if you choose to make something after that time, right? You've lost the opportunity to make the nafilah. It's nafilah, so it's not like you have to make it up, but there's attitude so that if you are in the habit of making these nafil prayers, you can keep the habit. Just because you oversleep one day doesn't mean now you have to say, oh man, subhanAllah, I've missed my chance to keep this habit up. No, Allah gives you some room to make that nafil up in the name of keeping that habit, even though you don't have to. The second point they say you can make nafil as much as you can, but these nafil will not prevent you from making subh in congregation. So in other words, you can make as much nafil as you want, right? Before you make the raghibat al-fajr, right? But once you make the raghibat al-fajr, you should hold off on the nafil, and you should cut all of the nafil, including raghibat al-fajr, once it becomes time to make the fard prayer of Salatul Subh in congregation. You don't delay Salatul Subh because you want to make the nafil prayer, right? I remember when I spent a year living, alhamdulillah, in Senegal, in Medina Bay, I would sometimes like to make my nafil prayer, the Raghibat al-Fajr, those 2 rakats, in my room, and then walk to Fajr, and then make the salat in congregation. But I had to stop. Why? Because sometimes I would end up coming late to the congregational prayer. I think one time I might have missed it or came close to missing it. So then I said, oh, okay, I can't do this anymore because I can't let my nafil cause me to miss the Salatul Subh in congregation. So I got to come a little bit earlier, make my nafil in the masjid, and sit, do some dhikr, whatever I'm going to do until it becomes time to make Salatul Subh. So you can make as much nafil as you want until it becomes something that will prevent you from making Salatul Subh in congregation. The third point, they have it labeled here A, B, and C. So this is point C, right? In terms of, kind of giving us more context for the provision to be able to make nafil even in the time that is makruh before you make Salatul Subh. They say it is disliked for you to make up these what they call collect prayers, the hizb or the weird, the nafil prayers that you've become accustomed to making, you made it a habit to make. You can make, it is disliked for you to make up these prayers if it will prevent you from making subh in congregation when you are outside of the mosque. So it's not just salat in the mosque, but it's also salatul subh even outside of the mosque, right? You are disliked from doing this if it's going to prevent you from making salatul subh in congregation, in the mosque or out the mosque. And then D, the last point they make is, however, when the congregation is inside the mosque, it is haram to do collect prayers, meaning these nafil prayers that you're making up while the congregation does subh. Why? Because you can't be off to the side making your nafil prayers while there's in the masjid when they're making the fard prayer, right? Now, if you've come to the masjid, you made your fard for dhuhr, and then a group of people come into the masjid, they're not praying with the main jamaat, they just have an extra second jamaat, and they make their dhuhr, you have the choice. You can either join them and make the dhuhr with them, or you cannot because you've already made dhuhr, right? If you choose to make it with them, it's better because you get the reward of praying in congregation. But if you don't, alhamdulillah, you already made your dhuhr, right? But in a case where there's a jamaat making the fard, and you need to make that fard, it is haram for you to go off and make your nafil, right? Your nafil while they're making the fard, right? Your nafila, you don't make it while they're making the fard, right? Let's say you owe a fard prayer, you owe salatul dhuhr, right? And the jamaat is making salatul asr. Then you go off to the side and make your salatul dhuhr. Why? Because you have to pray dhuhr before you pray asr. You have to keep the fards in their order, right? But in terms of nafila, right, you don't make the nafila while the jamaat is making the fard. One of the reasons for this is because the fard takes precedence over the nafil, right, all the time. Another reason is because the ability to make salat in jama'ah, right, takes precedent over you making it by yourself. And thirdly, because you don't want the people to think that you're not praying because you have a problem with the imam or you have a problem with the jama'ah. So there's the fiqh in these texts of fiqh, there's a high priority placed on unity, so you don't want to do anything that's going to undermine unity and make the people think that you're sort of boycotting the jama'ah or boycotting the imam or anything like that. So these are the reasons why if the jamaat's making fard, you need to make fard. You can't go make nafil by yourself. If these four conditions are not met, then it is makruh to do collect prayers. So in other words, we just mapped out it's makruh for you to do nafil prayers in these times. But when it comes to making nafil prayer in the morning before you make salatul subh, you have a little bit more flexibility if you are trying to make up prayers that you normally make before salatul subh that you simply, didn't have quite enough time to make. You can continue to pray them, but within those parameters we just gave. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Alauddin. Welcome. We're talking about the makruhat of nafil prayers. We covered when it is haram in a previous class to make nafil, to make nawafil, and now we've just covered when it's makruh to make nawafil. And we're talking about nafil salah, right?
Wa alaikum assalam.
They also make a note here. They say Eid prayer begins about 15 minutes after sunrise or when the sun is as high as a stick, and it ends at dhuhr. This is just an added note that that they mention here, alhamdulillah, in this part of the book, and this is may come in handy because Eid prayers will be upon us in what about 3 weeks or something like that, or less than 3 weeks now. We're already past the 10th day. I think we're in the maybe 12th day of the fast. Um, so in any case, at the end of Ramadan, we'll make Eid prayers, and then time of Eid, it begins about 15 minutes. So that same time when, as we said, you have the right to begin making nafil, begin making the wafu salah after sunrise, about 15 minutes after sunrise, right? You can make Eid salah at that point and any time after that, right? Up until uh the time for Salatul Dhuhr. At Salatul Dhuhr, now you need to make Eid before Salatul Dhuhr. And for anybody who hasn't been with us when we covered the earlier part of this lesson, I just want to clarify in case you're confused. I know many of us have grew up with the understanding or have read and learned that you should not pray when the sun is rising, setting, or at its highest point. But some of the scholars were of the opinion that the prohibition from the Prophet ﷺ was only against praying when the sun is rising and setting, and that actually the Prophet ﷺ discouraged people from praying when the sun was at its highest point simply because it was very hot, right? And it was like a hardship on people to pray at that time of high noon in the desert. So there's different opinions about that, but that's why the book says, you can pray nafil until the time of Dhuhr, right? Because the time of Dhuhr, of course, starts after high noon when the sun begins to decline toward the west. Now, at the end of this lesson, they have a series of questions. Sometimes Sheikh Amin would include in the book question and answer exchanges that he had with Dr. Dunya, or that people in the class had with Dr. Dunya. It's the questions that came up in class. So here we have one of those questions. Bismillah. Someone asked the question, is there a reason why we are not allowed to pray when the sun is rising or setting? And he explains there are several traditions which say that the sun is rising or setting when it rises or sets the horns of the devil, right? That it joins the horns of. I'm sorry, subhanAllah. I was trying to mute someone else. I muted myself. I'm sorry. So let me. I don't know what the last thing you heard. So let me repeat. Dr. Dunya said he answered. Someone asked the question: is there a reason why we are not allowed to pray when the sun is rising or setting? He responded: there are several traditions which say that when the sun is rising or setting, it joins the horns of Satan. It joins the horns of Shaitan. This means that Shaitan, the devil, is with the sun at that time, and he made many people worship the sun at that time. Some say also some interpret this as meaning that the Shaitan is actually praying at the time of sunrise and sunset, right? Which is profound to think about, Shaitan, who's the big kafir, who's leading everybody toward kufr, has enough sense to know that he has to worship his Lord. So what about, us to think that we don't need to, right? But it's interesting interpretations people have. Others point to this, and this is what Dr. Dunya is indicating here, that many of the kuffar, of the non-believing people, worship the sun. And so they pray, they make the sunrise and sunset a time for worship because they worship the sun. And so we want to make sure that we're distinct from them. We don't want people thinking we're sun worshippers. No, we worship Allah who makes the sun rise and set. The other madhahib say that when the sun is in the meridian, it also accompanies the horns of the devil. So the meridian, this means when the sun is at its highest point, high noon. This is what I was just talking about. The other madhahib, the other schools of thought, say that when the sun is in the meridian or at its highest point, it also accompanies the horns of Shaitan. And nafil is prevented at this time, except on Friday, because of the mercy of Friday. You can pray nafil, right? But again, in the Maliki method, the opinion that we were made aware of is that the sun being at its highest point isn't like when the sun is rising and setting, and Allah knows best. Note: you are not allowed to do the 2 rakah for greeting the masjid after you come to the masjid and you join in immediately with the congregation in prayer, or you spend time doing something before greeting the mosque. So that what they're saying here is, again, in the course of this question and answer, someone must have asked a question about the 2 rak'ah to greet the masjid, tahiyatul masjid. This is a practice that Sidna Bilal, radiallahu anhu, the great Sahaba from Ethiopian ancestry, Ahbash, Habashi ancestry. We know the story of Bilal, radiallahu anhu, inshallah ta'ala, how great of a Sahaba he was. And one of the things he would always do is he would not sit in the masjid before making 2 rak'ah as a way to sort of greet the masjid. And so this is a good practice, but if you come to the masjid and they're making the Fard Salah, you join the Fard Salah, right? You don't make Tahiyatul Masjid. The Fard Salah takes precedence. And if you come into the masjid and you do something else before you make a nafil, that's fine. It's not haram, but then you wouldn't necessarily be counted as one of the people who makes the 2 rak'ah to greet the masjid. The 2 rak'ah to greet the masjid, this form of nafil, is something that if you're going to do it, you should make that the first thing that you do upon entering the masjid. Then he mentions if you start to make nafil prayer in the time when nafil prayer is haram, you have to cut the prayer immediately. So let's say you started praying and you didn't realize you were praying at sunset or sunrise, right? And you became aware of that, or you forgot. Maybe you forgot. Maybe this is new information for you. And you leave this class and you go and you make nafil and you realize, oh, I just learned I'm not supposed to be praying right now because it's the time of sunrise, right? If that happens, you cut the prayer immediately. You stop. You don't finish it. You salam out because this is a haram time to make salah. If you start to make nafil prayer in a time when nafil prayer is makruh, you should cut it. Is mustahab to cut it. So let's say you realize, oh, I already made my salatul subh and I just started a nafil salah. It's not the time of sunrise yet, so it's not haram, but it's also a time when it's makruh, because it's in between the fard prayer of subh and the time of sunrise. In that situation, you should cut it. It is mustahab to cut it. It is pleasing to Allah for you to cut it. You'll be rewarded for cutting it. But a person who didn't cut it will not have been doing something haram. So it's not haram for you to continue it, but you should not continue it. It's mustahab for you to cut it at that time. If you are in a time when nafil prayer is haram or makruh, you should not do janazah prayer or sujood al-tilawah. However, there is an exceptional time for those two things, and the time after dawn and before is far. So they're saying here, you also should not do salatul janazah at those times, or make sajda, like they mention here, sujood al-tilawah. This is when you hear certain verses of the Quran that indicate that you should make sajda and praise Allah in sajda. When you hear those verses, if you know them, if you recognize them, you should make sajda. Or if you hear those verses and you see everybody else make sajda, then you make sajda too, right? But if it's at the time of sunset or sunrise, or one of the times when it's haram or makruh to make nafil prayer, then you don't make the sajda at that time, right? You also don't make salatul janazah at that time, right? However, there is an exception for those two things in the time, I think it should say, after dawn, right? And before isfar, right? So here when they say isfar, I believe they're talking about the isfar that comes after asr, because once you get after asr, right? Well, they say the time after dawn as well. But after asr, right? You can make salatul janazah, right? After asr, you can make salatul janazah as long as it's before this time of isfar, right? Isfar is the time where if you look, everything has a golden glow from the sun reflecting on it. And it's letting you know that we're in the end of Asr's time, and we're coming up on, soon we'll be at sunset and it'll be time for Maghrib, right? That time is the time that begins the obligatory time for Asr. So if you haven't prayed Asr yet, you got to pray Asr straight away. So between Asr and how you doing, Sidi Hassan? So that time between Salatul Asr, if you make Salatul Asr early, in its ikhtiyari time, its choice time, its best time, then from that time until the obligatory time of Asr, which is the time of Isfar, where you have that yellowness permeating everything, you can make Salatul Janazah in that block of time. And one of the blessings of this is if you live in a place that's very hot, where they pray outside, and I've been to places like that, this is a nice cool time. So as a mercy, Allah lets the people gather at that cool time to pray Salatul Janazah, right? And also they mention the same for after dawn, right? So after dawn, meaning after Salatul Subh has come in, but before the obligatory time of Salatul Subh. You have the exception for Janazah and Sujood Tilawah, right? I remember the first time I went to a place where they made Salatul Janazah after Salatul Asr. I said, oh, this is ajib, this is surprising, because I was under the impression you don't make any nafil prayers, right, after Salatul Asr. And then I learned this information, and I said, oh, okay, mashallah, alhamdulillah. This is an exception that the scholars, point out, that you can make Salatul Janazah and Sujood Tilawah in that block of time, right, between when Asr is made and Isfar. And I'll end there, inshallah ta'ala. That's a good ending place. The next lesson is going to be on the adhan, right? So when we come next week, inshallah, we will do the lesson, and we'll try to get through the whole lesson of the adhan. I want to pick up the pace a little bit, inshallah ta'ala. But we'll stop there and open up the floor for the last 5 minutes or so in case anybody has any questions. Bismillah. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Brother Joshua, how you doing? And folks can feel free to type their questions in the chat, or if you want to take yourself off mute and ask the question audibly, that's fine too. Folks who are watching on YouTube, you can try to type the question in the chat, even though it seems that maybe the chat is disabled right now. Let me refresh it. And folks can, but you can try, inshallah. It seems like maybe it's working now that I refreshed the page. So you can feel free to type your questions in the chat if you're watching on YouTube, or you can type them in the chat or ask it audibly on Zoom. Oh, okay. Alhamdulillah, I see, Brother Joshua. Now I see your question. You said, are there any cases where not performing sunnah would be haram or makruh, like eating with the right hand, saying Bismillah before doing things? That I see what you're saying. So, are there any times where making a sunnah would not making a sunnah would be makruh? I don't know of any. I don't remember coming across anything in any of the books that says it is makruh to, not make this or that sunnah. However, if the people were making Salatul Janazah, I would feel uncomfortable not joining them. Assalamu alaikum. Hajj Dawood, welcome. So someone just asked the question, and I'll repeat it. Assalamu alaikum, Hajj Dawood.
Yeah, yeah. Only go be a few minutes because Margaret get ready to come in. I was driving.
Okay, thank you, alhamdulillah. We're gonna shut it down in 4 minutes too. So hopefully, I'm hoping that's before Maghrib comes in on the East Coast, inshallah.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. But someone asked the question, I'll repeat it so that you can hear it, Hajj Dawood, in case you have anything to add. They said, are there any times when performing a sunnah prayer, nafil salah, would be considered haram, or where not performing a sunnah prayer would be considered haram or makruh? And they compare it to things like, okay, eating with the right hand, to eat with the left hand would be considered makruh, unless, if you had the ability to eat with your right hand, or not saying Bismillah before you eat or something like that, this would be makruh. So they're saying, I think if I'm understanding his question, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think he's asking, are there any times where not making a nafil salah, not doing a sunnah salah, would be considered makruh? And I said, I can't recall ever reading or hearing that to not do this sunnah or that sunnah would be considered makruh. Certainly not haram, because then it would be a fard, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. In terms of makruh, I've never heard any cases of that. But if I was in the masjid and the people were praying Salatul Janazah, I would feel it would seem inappropriate at the least. It would seem bad adab to not join the janazah prayer because it's a fard kifaya. It's a communal fard, meaning everybody doesn't have to do it, but somebody has to do it. And it's such a big, blessing to be able to participate in praying for our brother and sister after they pass. And it's something we want people to do for us. And you're doing it in the Jamaat. So, but if I was in the masjid and we made Salatul Janazah after Jum'ah and somebody had to run to work, mashallah, they got to go to work, right? So even that, I don't think I would say is that that's makruh, right? Does that sound accurate to you?
Yes, that's true. But what about in the case of you in the masjid before Maghrib and you want to make the nafil salat?
Right. So we covered. So the lesson today was on the makruh of salat. We covered the haram makruh. So yes, if the maghrib is in and it's time to make, if the adhan is called for maghrib, it would be makruh for us to make the 2 rak'ah, for instance, to greet the masjid, right? But actually for us, because to pray during the time of sunset, it'd be haram, right? After the time of sunset, before the fard prayer of maghrib is made, that will be makruh, right? So yeah. So those cases, of course, those are cases where it will be makruh to make the sunnah. But I think he's asking at any times when it will be makruh to not make the sunnah, and I can't think of any. He said, I meant just like, so, okay, so he said he's not talking about salah. He's saying, are there cases where it would be considered makruh not to make a sunnah act? I don't think so because, sunnah acts are mustahab, right? So I think it's almost like saying, is there ever a time when it's makruh to not do something that's mustahab? And I don't think so, I mean, like you mentioned, eating with the right hand or saying Bismillah before you eat. Okay, I guess I could see someone saying it's makruh, because it's makruh to eat with the left hand, to eat without saying Bismillah. So sure, but I don't know if how helpful it is to think about it in that category, right? Unless there's something to the question that I'm missing. I don't know how helpful that is, but I'm trying to wrap my head around the question. So maybe you can ask a follow-up question, inshallah ta'ala, or help me kind of understand the context of the question, inshallah ta'ala. Someone else said, someone asked me if I would suggest any Sirah lecture series to listen to for Ramadan. Not really. There's a lot of good ones out there. I really like Martin Ling's Sirah, There are others that other people like more, I don't know of any. I mean, we have Sidi Amir Suleiman was doing every Monday. He was doing Muhammadan Mondays. He was reading the Sirah. I'm not sure if he still does it or not. So you can check if you're in the Ruhul Adab group to see if that's still happening. But aside from that,
Ibrahim Ifi Usa.
Yeah, Ibrahim Osiefa. He's a good one. I would agree with that as a recommendation. Ibrahim Osiefa. He's a brother from the UK. He's excellent. So check out his Sirah, inshallah ta'ala, during Ramadan. I've been listening to a brother named Walid Mus'ad. He has a YouTube page called Sabil. I think it's Sabeel. It's like Sabil Community or something like that. And he's going through a text by a Maliki scholar named Qari Ibn Arabi. That's not the Ibn Arabi al-Haythami, the Sufi. There's another Ibn Arabi, he's a Maliki Qadi, and he has been going through a text of his called Stations of the Believers. Short sessions, like maybe 10, 15 minutes per day. And then also Brother Amir Suleiman, Omar Suleiman down in Texas. He has a series where he's like 10 to 15 minutes a day talking about the Barzakh, and he's drawing from different texts. I know one of them is Ibn al-Qayyim's book on the Ruh. So those are some good ones if you're looking for just some good Ramadan listening to keep you in the mix. And also there's a Fada digital app. I'll make a plug for my brother. One of our brothers in the Jamaat has an excellent app where he's made a lot of the works from Sheikh Ibrahim Nias and Sheikh Hassan and different Tijani scholars available And that's called Faydah, Faydah Digital. I think there's an H there. Could be wrong. Could be just Fayda. But Faydah Digital, they have a Ramadan playlist, and they have Sheikh Hassan Sisi going through a hadith text called Khams Khamseen is 55, a collection of 55 hadith. And it's a class that he did many years ago to some of the young people from the States who were there in Senegal studying. So those are some good Ramadan listens for you. And this might be the last question in case anybody else has a question, or Brother Joshua, if you have some context to help me kind of do a better job of answering your question, inshallah. But if not, maybe this will be the last one. Someone asked, oh, subhanallah, this is not a question for the group. This is a question about something else. And no, I have not yet. Alhamdulillah. But I look forward to it, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Alhamdulillah. Any final questions before we close out? I know it's about to be time to break fast on the East Coast, so I don't want to hold y'all. Yes, alhamdulillah. Thank you for the reminder, Brother Joshua. I'm just swamped right now with some work stuff, but I haven't forgotten you, and I will, and I'll give you some feedback soon, inshallah ta'ala. Alhamdulillah, jazakumullah khair. Thank you everyone for joining us. We make a quick dua today so you can get to your iftar on the East Coast. Please remember us and Sheikh Amin and all of us and our families and our loved ones in your dua when you break the fast and in your prayers tonight. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Assalamu alaikum Jamaat. Appreciate y'all. Inshallah we see you next week. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.